next up, I'd like to invite Melanie Rosella to the stage. Mel is the Acting Managing Editor of Strategy at Therapeutic Guidelines and will be presenting on a new approach to developing the guidelines.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Brad. I'm so pleased to be able to speak to you all today about this next phase in Therapeutic Guidelines' journey. I know it's late in the day and you've all been taking in lots of information, but I want to ask you to bear with me for a few more minutes because this next presentation is a little bit different. And the reason it's different is because it's about you, the incredible community of experts and guideline users without whom Therapeutic Guidelines would not exist. We are shifting our publishing model in response to your needs and feedback, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. Firstly, I want to give you some context into why we commenced a review of our publishing model in the first place, what problems we were trying to solve. I want to talk about some of the inputs we considered when re-engineering the model, and finally explain the components of the new model and what this means for you as experts and users of the guidelines. So, how did we get here? We set about re-engineering the publishing model to address a problem we've been grappling with for a long time, maintaining the currency of the guidelines. Here's a quick snapshot of our current guideline review model, which is the traditional model that you're probably all familiar with. Essentially, for each guideline in the Therapeutic Guidelines series, every 4 years we reconvene an expert group to review all the topics in the guideline. Depending on the size of the guideline, this review period can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months, and then we publish all the topics in the guideline at one time. In the example of the antibiotic guidelines, due to the sheer volume and size of the guidelines, as Lisa mentioned, we actually had to have 6 separate writing groups to cover it all, and each one had around a 2-year review schedule. Overall, the guidelines took around 4 years to update in full. This model of updating all the topics at one time is very much a legacy from our history as a book publisher, starting with the first antibiotic guidelines way back in 1978. And at that time, 4 years was considered a rough marker for how quickly evidence evolved. Of course, we know that that is not the case anymore. In between the schedule for guideline reviews, we have always collected feedback on the guidelines and tracked signals for change. But as a book publisher, we had quite a high threshold for making changes between the 4 reviews. In 2019, a strategic decision was made to move away from book publishing to a primarily digital product to enable some changes to be made between those 4 yearly reviews. These were done by working with individual members of the expert group or in some cases having to reconvene the whole group. But they were generally interim updates designed to prolong the life of the guideline until the next full review. So increasingly, there have been lots of challenges with this model. We now have 22 guidelines in our series, soon to be 23. And updating 22 guidelines every 4 years is a huge amount of time and resource. The evidence also tells us that even if we were to maintain that 4-yearly schedule, we still wouldn't be current. As many as 1 in 5 recommendations are out of date after 3 years. So perhaps the review cycle needs to be less than every 4 years. But then we also know that not all topics are equal. The evidence changes more rapidly in some areas than others, and usage of topics across clinical areas also varies. So for some content, 4 years is too long, but for others it's too soon, which raises the question of whether it's an efficient use of resource to have all topics on the same review schedule. Another problem. The scope and complexity of guideline reviews seems to increase with every version, reflecting the increasing complexity of the underlying evidence base. And this, of course, has flow-on effects for timelines, resourcing and costs. So it's impossible for us to keep up. We would need to constantly increase resources, and it's not sustainable. For example, the antibiotic guidelines has doubled in size for the last 3 versions. We also knew there were inefficiencies in the way that we worked, and there were new tools and technologies that would help us work faster without compromising quality. And finally, we knew from our trial of doing interim targeted updates to the guidelines between those 4 yearly reviews that while these did allow us to address important practice changes, they were less efficient for a number of reasons, including having to reconvene the group each time. So, We concluded that TGL's 4-yearly legacy fixed review model was no longer fit for purpose, and we needed to review and re-engineer the model. To inform a new model, we didn't just want to go on our assumptions about what our users wanted or how our experts wanted to work with us. So we conducted an extensive piece of research, interviewing over 40 users and experts from a range of disciplines, as well as researching other guideline development methods. So what did our users tell us? Interestingly, when we spoke to guideline users, there were variable expectations about how frequently content should be updated. Some people said every 2 years, some people said every 5 years. But overwhelmingly, the sentiment was that the frequency of updates is for you to decide. What's important to us is that the information is right when we need it. Concerns relating to currency tended to arise if content conflicted with other information they were aware of or didn't address an issue they were expecting, such as a new drug, or something that might be topical in the media at the time. In particular, users expected to see new drugs, safety signals, and changes to disease-specific national clinical practice guidelines addressed in therapeutic guidelines with minimum delay. There was less expectation for cutting-edge research, and in fact, a sense that TG was more reliable or safer because this was the case. Importantly, this reinforced for us that focusing on a point-of-care context was meeting user needs. For users, the expert group model remains critical. Expert consensus is what's driving the trust and the confidence in the guidelines. So what we concluded from these conversations is that what users wanted was timely updating. Currency for them was about updating in response to signals for change, such as evidence shifts or other practice-based changes, rather than updates on a time-based schedule. What did our experts tell us? Our experts are critical to our content development process, and we needed to make sure that any solution we designed was suitable and feasible for them. When we spoke to them, they agreed that innovation was needed. The current end-to-end process was too long, and content often had to be revised at multiple times because of changes that occurred while awaiting publication. They acknowledged that sometimes time was spent rewriting content because the 4-yearly review schedule presented an opportunity, but there may not necessarily be a signal for change. There was also support for moving to a more signal-driven update schedule with more granular, timely updates. Importantly, they were willing to be engaged with us on a regular basis and noted the benefits to being on an expert group. They were also willing to support us in tracking signals for change, identifying when the content needed to change, and noted that this was an extension of the work they were doing in practice. They confirmed that literature surveillance could be targeted to areas that we know are changing, making it more feasible for us to do this across the breadth of content in therapeutic guidelines. So using these inputs, we've designed a model that delivers updates in response to signals for change rather than a time-based model. And a signal is essentially anything that would be an indicator that a change is needed to the guidelines. It could be a clinical trial, an update to a disease-specific national guideline, a new drug becoming available, or, for example, in the case of that diphtheria outbreak that we just spoke about, that could also be prompt a change. Scoping changes, new content, structural changes, all of these will be fed through as a signal. Depending on the nature of the signal, updates may involve revising a whole topic, but it could just be a review of a section or even a recommendation. The key change being here that we're not setting out to review the whole guideline at once, and this means resource use is being targeted to where we know the change is needed, allowing us to work more efficiently. A key aspect of the model is engaging a standing expert group for each therapeutic area. The standing group will have a regular cadence of meetings, so signals can be tracked, prioritised and addressed as they occur. The new model is centred around a robust system for tracking signals for change, focused on expert group intel, targeted literature, tracking TGA and PBS updates, as well as tracking updates to disease-specific national clinical practice guidelines, inputs from key stakeholder groups, and targeted literature surveillance. And I haven't included here, but should mention that user feedback is also such a critical source of intel for us. Expecting that there'll be more signals for change that can be dealt with at any one time, We'll also use the expert group to be able to prioritise the signals based on what would be of most value and relevance to the user, so those signals can be worked on and published first. A key difference is that we're going to publish updates as they are ready, rather than doing the whole guideline at once. Topics that have been updated will get a new last updated date. And also importantly, where the expert group have reviewed a topic and determined that no changes are needed, this will get a last review date, an updated last review date, providing transparency to the user that that topic is still current. So this is our new cycle of working. Rather than at a whole guideline level, we'll be working at a signal level, whereas a signal would prompt a review of the content and then a change to the guidelines. This is obviously a significant change to the way that we're working, and we've thought really carefully about how to minimise risk and fully understand the impacts of this new model. We've initially refined it on a small number of guidelines: respiratory, sexual and reproductive health and diabetes. The standing groups for these guidelines first met in October 2025, and the first round of updates from these standing groups will be published in June. So far, the feedback from these experts and editors involved have been really positive. We've also established a customer advisory group to help us assess the value of the model for users. And we're monitoring a range of other outcome metrics. The value of this new model will only be realised if we are also able to communicate those changes to the users of the guidelines. So we've also developed a number of product features to accompany this new model. You'll see on most of the topics in the guidelines, there is now a topic updates sidebar, which, when you click on that, shows you what's changed in the topic in the last release. We've also included a list of the expert group members that were involved in the revision at a topic level, so there's transparency on who's contributed to the update. On the homepage, you can also see all the updates across all guidelines and be able to filter by guideline and date. This slide just demonstrates the value of the new model using our respiratory guidelines as an example. So as I mentioned, we started in October 25 and we'll be publishing our first round of updates in June 26. Further updates are planned for August, November, March, and then on a quarterly basis thereafter. In comparison with the traditional model, we wouldn't have published anything until March 2027. Importantly, this has allowed us to publish topics like asthma and COPD much earlier, knowing their value to the users. So what's next for us? We're kicking off standing groups for several guidelines later this year. We're looking to use new technologies to improve our efficiency, including AI tools. And we're planning the application of the new model to the antibiotic guidelines, recognising the huge complexity in this project. We'll be working really closely with experts and key stakeholders to make sure all implications are worked through. I've got a QR code up there that you can sign up to receive updates around all the work that we're doing, including content updates, as well as around this project. And finally, we'd love to hear from you as well. As I mentioned, user feedback is so critical to our ability to improve the guidelines. We'd also love to hear your thoughts on the new model, as well as any other feedback more generally. We'll have a booth for this whole conference, so please come past and have a chat, or you can submit feedback through here. And there's also an option to indicate if you're interested in participating in any of our user engagement activities. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Mel? No? Great. Okay, well, oh no, sorry. Apologies.
If you're not doing the full topic, which topics that may not be triggered by another system have a sort of lifetime review? Like you will have, for example, if it's not reviewed by 5 years, review it?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're monitoring with the pilots and looking at sort of whether we need to implement a minimum timeframe for review. We haven't done that as yet, but we're looking at sort of how often every topic is touched, and if there needs to be a minimum timeframe at which you just do come back and go, have we missed anything here as well? Yeah.
Do you have a mechanism but just seeing what's actually relevant and what people are using?
Yep, we definitely do. So we use Google Analytics for that. We also use another system for institutional access as well. So yes, we do monitor that regularly, and that's part of one of the sort of measures that then feeds into what we might prioritise. So when we have a number of updates to work on, we might say, well, we'll do this because we know that people are using this topic more frequently.